again, everyone. It's great to see all the faces out there in the crowd. Glad everyone could make it despite weather challenges in a few places and other challenges with getting funding. But welcome to the 77th Annual Scientific Conference of the AAFS here in Baltimore. I wanted to just give a little bit of background on the theme of this year's meeting and then talk a little bit about the plenary session. And as everyone knows, the title for this meeting is Technology, a Tool for Transformation or Tyranny. And some people may think that's a little bit over the top, but when you hear things that Michael Rogers is talking about and how some of these technologies may be in the hands of authoritarian governments or other bad actors, I think there is a potential for significant peril, but there also is great promise in some of these technologies as far as increased efficiency, decreased errors, and at least theoretically, freeing humans, individuals up to doing higher order tasks. I really became interested in this topic about 10 years ago when I read a book by Yuval Harari called Homo Deus, which kind of talked about potentially the next 100 years of humanity and what things might look like with some of the technologies that were being utilized. And I know that a lot of authors have described the dystopian future over the last 100 years. You have Huxley, Orwell, Asimov, but somehow Harari's description of the future really resonated with me more, and the technological revolution seemed more imminent and seemed to gain steam when you started hearing about ChatGPT and some of the other things that Michael cited in his talk today. And you can kind of see how fast things are moving now and where different forensic science disciplines may be impacted and by what different technologies. You have forensic genealogy databases, you have algorithms and AI for risk assessment, those minority report type things potentially, fMRI for deception detection, fMRI for prediction of behavior, and on and on and on. And I think really every section is going to be impacted by these things, both from a kind of ethical practice standpoint and really a workforce standpoint. So I just want the organization to kind of be keep up with these things and help its members keep up with these things. And during this conference, I'm really hoping, and a lot of individuals have been working on this already, but how do we implement and utilize these new technologies appropriately, ethically, and justly? How do we balance the interests of probative value and justice and fundamental fairness? And then how do we educate the judiciary and other policymaking entities about the science and about the implementation of these technologies? I think this is really going to be important, as I said, for kind of societal reasons, but also for workforce and professional survival reasons. And I think that we have a lot of sections in this academy that can really work together and collaborate to that end. And that's one of the real benefits of the academy is the breadth of different expertises that we have. And I realize that, as I said, the title is maybe a little alarmist, but I really want to try to present a balanced view of these technologies during the conference. And I think the presenters are going to do a great job of that. So with regard to the plenary session in particular, when I was trying to think about how to organize and structure it, I was kind of at a bit of a loss. It seemed like such a huge topic to try to fit in an hour and a half. And then I had a little bit of an epiphany, which was, and I mentioned this during one of my questions to Michael, is what is the role of government and us as citizens in the oversight and the regulation of these technologies and rolling them out in a responsible fashion and using them in a responsible fashion. And I really think that in our society, as I hinted at in my question, there's something of this fatalism and helplessness with regard to these technologies, particularly AI, and that people think it's inevitable that they're going to run roughshod over us and that Silicon Valley just has control of everything and we're all going to have to listen to the move fast and break things motto, but I don't think that's inevitable, particularly if we kind of take the bull by the horns and try to address these things proactively. And I really hope that via this plenary session, our esteemed panelists can show that we do have some agency over these technologies, and that by identifying their risks and benefits proactively, we're able to minimize the risks and maximize the benefits of the technologies. And I truly believe all of our branches of government have a crucial role in this process, as does private industry and scientific organizations like this one. And I think kind of implicitly this panel also speaks to the role that AAFS and other scientific organizations have in advising policymakers, such as legislatures, such as judges, such as administrative agencies in the state and federal governments. I know that's probably not a universally accepted sentiment in the academy, but I do feel it's an obligation that we have to society, and I feel pretty passionately about that. So I will get off my soapbox now and turn things over to Plenary Chair Dino DeCrisce and Marla Carroll. And I just wanted to thank them for doing such a great job in organizing this plenary session through some challenging conditions. And I want to give thanks too to all the panelists for their willingness to give us their insights into this incredibly important topic. Also wanted to thank my program chair, Karen Rosenbaum, for organizing such a great keynote speaker and such a great program in general. Thanks very much.
I want to thank you all for coming to the plenary session this morning. We're very excited to present to you a panel of experts to discuss the topics that Kip was talking about, the double-edged sword of the of technology, advanced technologies, and how it might affect the forensic sciences in our society. Also want to thank very much the panelists who have taken from their time to be here today and to participate in this. We'll be introducing each of the speakers, and Marla will go first.
Good morning. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eric Bloedorn. He is MITRE's Chief Scientist of AI Adoption and works across MITRE to provide strategic advice to enable appropriate adoption and effective use of AI. Dr. Bloedorn has experience applying AI and ML to a wide variety of domains, including healthcare, aviation safety, law enforcement, and cybersecurity. During his 20-plus year career at MITRE, Dr. Bloedorn has been an active researcher, developer, and advisor, supporting work in clustering, classification, anomaly detection, sequence discovery, and visualization applied to a wide variety of sponsors and domains, including healthcare, aviation safety, and cybersecurity. He has provided guidance to multiple organizations with interest and equities in machine learning and artificial intelligence. He has also served in conference program committees and provided reviews for multiple journals. Dr. Bloedorn received a BA in physics from Lawrence University and an MS in computer science and PhD in information technology from George Mason University. Dr. Bloedorn, thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Marcus Rogers. Dr. Rogers is a former law enforcement officer who currently serves as a professor and associate dean for faculty at Purdue University. He is also director of the Purdue Digital Forensics Lab and chief scientist for the Tippecanoe Purdue High-Tech Crime, that's hard to say, High-Tech Crime Unit. Dr. Rogers obtained his PhD in forensic psychology along with an MA and BA in psychology and criminology, all from the University of Manitoba. He is honored to be a fellow at the Center for Education and Research, Information Assurance and Security. His research interests include applied cyber forensics, psychological analysis of digital crime scenes, cyber terrorism, and developing tools for digital evidence investigations. Throughout his career, Dr. Rogers has been fortunate to receive various awards, such as the AAFS Digital and Multimedia Sciences Outstanding Research Award and the Paul H. Chapman Medal from the Foundation for Improvement of Justice. Dr. Rogers actively shares his expertise and insights at national and international conferences. His contributions extend to academic literature and encompass digital forensics, investigative methodologies, and emerging trends in digital evidence analysis. He's also a superstar for digital and multimedia sciences section. Please welcome Dr. Rogers. Hello.
I'd also like to welcome the Honorable Judge, Dr. Donald Shelton. Judge Shelton was a circuit judge in Ann Arbor, Michigan for almost 25 years. The Michigan Constitution requires that judges leave the bench at age 70. He then became director of the Criminology and Criminal Justice program at the University of Michigan. He retired from the university in 2024, but continues to remotely teach forensic science and criminal justice courses at Michigan State University and the University of Arizona. Judge Shelton earned his undergraduate degree from Western Michigan University, his Juris Doctor degree from the University of Michigan Law School, and his master's degree in criminology from Eastern Michigan University. He holds his PhD in judicial studies from the University of Nevada. Dr. Shelton is a prolific author, particularly in the field of forensic science evidence. His doctoral dissertation was Criminal Adjudication, the Challenges of Forensic Science Evidence in the Early 21st Century. And his most recent books include Forensic Science in Court, Challenges in the 21st Century, and Forensic Science Evidence, Can the Law Keep Up with Science? He has published many articles and research papers and was one of the earliest published researchers into the so-called CSI effect, the expectation of jurors for scientific evidence and the impact of technology on jurors and the justice system. Judge Shelton is an AAFS Fellow and past chair of the AAFS Jurisprudence Section. Please welcome Judge Shelton. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Paul Ward, who is the Chief Scientist for the Social and Behavioral Sciences Department at MITRE. He has over 20 years of experience applying scientific methods and insights to a range of complex socio-technical challenges. He has led projects focused on assessing risk, managing uncertainty, augmenting human sense-making and decision-making, supporting human-machine AI collaboration, and on AI assurance and risk discovery. He is passionate about advancing our understanding of and exploring the interdependencies between human and machine cognition and leveraging this knowledge to improve the design and evaluation of human-centered systems. Paul is internationally known for his pioneering research on how expert decision makers think and adapt to real-world complexity and uncertainty. He has published 3 books, including the Oxford Handbook of Expertise, Accelerated Expertise, and over 200 scientific publications. He is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Human Factors and Ergonomics and has held multiple appointments as Professor of Applied Cognitive Psychology at universities across the US and UK. Alongside his MITRE role, he currently holds a professional appointment in the Department of Cognitive and Learning Sciences at Michigan Tech. He earned his PhD in Applied Experimental Psychology from Liverpool John Moores University in the UK and completed his postdoctoral training in Human Factors and Applied Cognitive Science at the University of Central Florida and Florida State University, respectively. Would you please welcome Dr. Ward? So how we arrange this plenary section is that we have a set of questions for our panelists. And we hope that it will spark thoughts in the audience as well, that these are general issues surrounding the promises and perils of advanced technologies. So our first question is, what might be the most promising applications of advanced technologies in improving the efficiency, reliability, validity, and effectiveness of the forensic science process? Are there misperceptions in the perceived capabilities of these advanced technologies? And I'll ask Dr. Bloedorn to please comment.
Good morning, everybody. Is this working? All right. I think I'll focus on the AI machine learning aspects of this rather than the forensic side, given my background. And I think there are some exciting, promising applications. First, the a group that I am with a lot lately has been involved with looking at computer vision and the idea of computer vision systems that can detect and classify objects from video and to track those objects through video with some high accuracy and high throughput with open source capabilities like YOLO, I think is an extremely promising application that has not yet seen the full breadth of possibility. So there is increasing work in that area, and the language models that are coming out, especially the multimodal models that are coming out, I think are going to make those even better than what we've seen before. The second area that I will talk about is digital forensics. As somebody who has spent a little bit of time looking at network and workstation logs, the ability of machine learning capabilities to go through large amounts of PCAP or NetFlow or other kinds of cyber data to identify patterns, to help with attribution, to identify behaviors, I think is a dramatic new capability that I think is very promising for forensics.
Are there other comments?
Let me just comment a little bit about the applications of AI in the legal system. As Michael Rogers indicated, the lawyers have glommed on to AI. They love it. As he indicated, it replaces those $200,000 a year associates who sit in the library anymore. And so they love it. And all of the legal technology providers have launched new AI applications, ChatGPT and Westlaw and Nexus, a number of others. And lawyers are anxious to use them. But let me say that the courtrooms are where forensic science testimony is offered, and they're not doing any of this stuff. The attitude of most judges toward AI and AI applications is somewhere between fear and loathing. By definition, AI is new, and we don't do new. New, by definition, is anti-status quo, and the law favors the status quo. New is contrary to the doctrine of stare decisis and precedent. When judges are asked a question, they don't say, what's the right answer? They say, what did other judges say? And that's the approach to stare decisis. So courts are reluctant, at the very least, to allow these new applications. And there's some reasons for that. I was listening to Michael talk about all the great things that the legal AI applications can do. ChatGPT took the universal bar exam and scored in the 90th percentile. Wow, that's great. But on the other hand, we've had some real experiences where legal research using AI has actually fabricated cases. One study of several of these applications showed that between 15 and 55% of the case citations that were made by AI were fabricated. The cases simply didn't exist. Just last week, a judge issued a show cause contempt order against a large law firm, Morgan & Morgan, because in their motion that they had filed before that judge, it turned out that 8 of the 9 cases they cited had been, in the judge's words, hallucinated by AI. So judges are naturally reluctant, especially as to AI. Judges are also going to be very skeptical about admitting AI-generated evidence. Presumably, any AI-produced evidence would have to meet the same Daubert standards for any other expert testimony. And as we know, judges really don't want to conduct Daubert hearings. But if they do, are we prepared when AI evidence is presented to answer the Daubert questions about, has it been tested? What is its error rate? Okay. Does it have any standards? Has it been peer reviewed? And what is its general acceptance in whatever the scientific discipline it happens to fall within? So while I don't mean to be Debbie Downer here, but it's a long way from producing AI applications to having those applications get admitted in court, and that's the forensic part of what forensic science is about.
Good. So I end up supporting a number of groups from the national security side, and while I'm a sort of technology enthusiast, I've absolutely heard the same things from, say, our intelligence community, right? I will not use this until I have some stronger belief that this thing works. And as a technology guy with AI, especially with these large language models, there is no, there's lots of testing that goes on. I can do benchmarks, but there's no formal guarantee of when this thing will work and when it will not. And so until there is a deep science of these things, in fact, I even saw a paper recently that said, a mathematical proof that said, these models will always hallucinate. Right. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of how much. And we can get better and reduce that, but it will always happen. And so if we could have bounds on those and know the conditions under which it works and we can have confidence and conditions when it won't, that actually might be then a useful tool in working with humans rather than just doing something on its own.
Dr. Rogers? Yes.
So I just want to make clear that whilst there may be some reservations in using AI, AI is in use in this field. Mm-hmm. And you may be familiar with Compass, for instance, that's used for recidivism decisions. I always get that word wrong. And sometimes for sentencing decisions. And interestingly, this is a black box system that isn't necessarily any better than URI making those same decisions, which begs the question, why are we using it? And in fact, it's a relatively, we believe, because this is proprietary information, complex model. Yet when you compare that complex model to much, much simpler models that are understandable and accessible, these simpler models have been shown to outperform the ones that are used by Compass. And so it's worthwhile noting that the technology is out there. It is in use. It doesn't necessarily always perform better than the next person or even better than an expert, but in many instances it should and does. But it's not necessarily always the best solution. I wanted to add one comment, if I can, about the second part of the question that was asked about the misperceptions in perceived capabilities about these advanced technologies. I think there are a number of misperceptions, and I think we kind of saw some allusion to that in the with the speaker this morning. We generally differentiate between narrow AI and general AI. A narrow AI might be kind of a specific tool used for a specific purpose with a specific intent that's based upon a specific data set, and that is hopefully generalizing to cases that are very, very similar to the cases on which it was trained. But general AI is one that goes beyond that data set, that goes beyond the context in which it was trained, and that actually is perhaps how we as lay individuals, I'm not a technologist, I'm a psychologist, how we as lay individuals might think about AI as our kind of robotic overlords that are going to overtake our world. There is that fear of being replaced by this technology, and I think that is largely a misconception about general AI that isn't necessarily available yet. And so certainly that technology is not really out there deployed in operation, but narrow AI is out there and it's being used.
Dr. Rogers?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate some of the promising applications, and we'll talk about this probably in a little bit more of a general as opposed to specifics. I think one of it is obviously our ability to deal with the extremely large amount of data that forensic scientists have to deal with. We're very good at collecting data. We're very good at understanding that there's data out there. We're not so good at what do we do with all this data once we have it, and how do we do it in a reasonable amount of time. And that's something, obviously, that's pressure on the courts. You can't take 5 years to go through that data with the excuse, because I haven't looked at everything yet. That's not going to fly in the court system. So the ability to take large amounts of data and to put that basically and to look at it and to, I guess, shorten the timeline between the data coming in and that decision, I think is a very promising application of that. The other promising application of this, I think, goes to forensic sciences in general, and I think it's making us look at forensic science from a systems perspective, that all the different pieces and the sections and what we do as forensic scientists are all interconnected, that they're not standalone, that we actually look at and we rely on each other when we're making that final decisions. And the use of the advanced technologies, I think, helps us put that information and helps us come up with a process and maybe a data flow, so we do understand, yes, we have to take a systems approach. We can't look at things in isolation. We can't look at things in a vacuum. And the pieces of us as different forensic science practitioners in the different fields are very interconnected. And, used correctly, obviously, it allows us then to actually share information that in some cases we would not have shared or known about or take longer to get this. So I think that is one very promising application, and I really do think that systems approach is the right way to be going with forensic sciences.
I didn't mean to say, I just wanted to comment, I didn't mean to say that AI wasn't being used in the judicial system, but I was talking about whether it can be used or should be used to prove guilt or innocence. There are a lot of forensic science technologies that are useful for investigative purposes. Facial recognition or phenotypes, for example, can be used to narrow the field of investigation, but that doesn't mean that they will ultimately be admissible or even should be admissible to prove guilt or innocence when the case comes before the jury. We do use AI in the Compass. Compass is an algorithm designed to make sentencing recommendations. But even that raises questions about what data goes in. How is the algorithm built? How are we going to deal with what's a gang, for example, in deciding whether this is a gang-related offense? Or how are we going to deal with juvenile convictions or dispositions? Should that be included in sentencing someone? Now I guess we have to deal with how Compass is going to handle pardons in deciding what the sentence should be.
Okay.
Thank you.
And add something, I think, to the misperceptions, and I think there's a few of them. I think one of the biggest misperceptions, especially by lay people, is that somehow using advanced technologies and using AI, they're infallible. They're not going to make mistakes. That somehow that you can blindly trust what comes out of the other end of this. The other is that using advanced technologies or AI is somehow going to eliminate bias. Well, we know that's not true. That is a nice aspirational goal, but we're not there yet, and I don't know whether we're ever going to get there. And the other, and you mentioned this, is that it's somehow going to replace the human. Somehow AI is going to be the expert witness. The advanced technology is going to be the expert witness. That is going to have the final say in the decision-making process, and hopefully we never get to that. We're nowhere near that now, but I think that is still a misperception. There's a lot of, well, I'm out of a job now because we're just going to plug the data in there. It's that solve the case button that we're going to push, and it's going to go to court, and we don't have a job anymore. I hope we never get to that stage. We're definitely nowhere near that yet.
Thank you. For the next question, what are the risks associated with the use of these technologies, and what are strategies to mitigate these risks to provide greater fairness, transparency, and to prevent misuse? Dr. Ward, I'd like you to start this off, please.
Thank you. So there are many kinds of risks, and I was looking around in some of the forensic literature to kind of get a better sense of the kinds of risks that AI might pose to your discipline. And, we just kind of run through these relatively quickly. Things like this field is using a lot of very sensitive data, which needs to be protected. And of course, greater use risk with that greater exposure and lack of protection from privacy. And so that's one issue. There is an issue of fairness that we've already talked about, and basically permitting or allowing AI to carry out miscarriages of justice. And so we want to make sure that issues are fair. Of course, if we want to be able to trust and make use of these systems, they have to be accurate and they have to be therefore be credible. Or in other words, to be credible, they have to be accurate. But that does beg the question that Eric began to raise about accurate when and where. There are, as we talked about, the narrow AI designed for a specific task with a specific intent, based upon a specific set of data. Where is the boundary where performance starts to drop? And what's the way in which performance starts to drop? Does it become less accurate, or does it start to commit more errors? And if it starts to commit more errors, are those false negatives, or are they false positives? Which will have different ramifications. And so making sure that our systems are credible and actually are doing the things we intended them to do is an issue that we're going to face here, or that you're going to face, should I say. We heard this morning about black box issues. We need to be able to scrutinize the systems that we're using if we're going to be able to justify the decisions that we're making. Not least to justify them, but to be able to understand them sufficiently so that if things change, I actually have enough knowledge to adapt on the fly as the situation dictates. And of course, transparency means auditability. Right, so we're going to have to be able to look at this data, not just plug it into a system and hope we get a great answer out of it. But that implies some degree of governability, right? Some degree of oversight into how these systems are working, which needs transparency, which needs auditability. And going back to the issue of accuracy, that also implies some degree of kind of integrity and data quality, right? We need to be sure that the data that we have was based upon some process that has some degree of scientific or integrity, is using technology that has some degree of system level or technological integrity, and that the data itself has some integrity, right? It is representative of the people that it's supposed to be talking about, not necessarily talking about people to whom the data doesn't pertain. And I think one of the things that we sometimes gloss over is one of the risks that we potentially engender when we kind of move towards an AI-enabled society is changing the role of humans to one of oversight, supervision, and monitoring. So that is, if right now we have certainly Amazon-type systems who are putting out technologies to do all the manual labor-type stuff. But we can foresee in the future where we have decision-type systems or decision support-type systems that are going to kind of support our ability to do more higher-order tasks like strategic decision-making and tactical and operational decision-making. But of course, it's very unlikely that the AI itself is going to make those kind of decisions, certainly when they involve life or death or decisions about somebody's life, that they're going to allow them to do that independently, which means that we're likely to be in a situation where there is going to be some interdependency between the humans who are using these systems and the systems themselves. And what I mean by that is we can't simply have AI providing an answer, be its hands and say, I'm done. The human and the system are probably going to have to work somewhat collaboratively in some instances, or at least receive information and have the ability to query or audit or investigate or probe why and how that answer was achieved, for instance. Which begs the question of how aware are we of what the system is doing? How much judgment can I have if I'm thrown into a situation where the information is, here's your answer? It's a little bit like what happens in an airplane when the technology fails and the autopilot turns off, throws it back to the human being, and what happens there? The human goes, I have no idea, where are we? What mode of flight are we in? It's actually called a mode error in aviation. And we see this quite a lot when we are out of the loop, or at least just kind of over the loop, or off the loop, whatever kind of loop terminology you want to use. We are going to be in a situation where we don't maintain sufficient awareness, because between you and I, humans are not very good monitors. We have a vigilance decrement. We monitor for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we start to go down in our ability to monitor. And so this task that we're being reassigned to do, we're not designed to do. And so now, exactly the situations where we want AI support is actually in the tasks that the human's being given to do while it works together with autonomy. And the last point I'll make about the kind of risks and I think you saw this in the Air France disaster, the inability to intervene in a meaningful way. That is, the plane technology kept telling me the nose was tipped up when actually it was tipped down, and I kept trying to do the other thing that the machine was not doing, and so I'm working in opposition, so I didn't have the ability to intervene. And so having AI doesn't necessarily mean giving up human control. The two things are orthogonal. They can be happening simultaneously. That is, there could be a kill switch. There could be some way of having AI provide very useful information, very useful recommendations, very useful support, yet not make me unable to act when I need to act. And so those are risks that we're going to need to look out. There are many more, but those are just a few. And I guess one thing to just say about how do we deal with those, you heard probably from my bio, I work on AI risk discovery and AI assurance. And so I think one of the things that we're going to have to do before we figure out how we fix the problem is figure out what the problem is, which means understanding what are the different dimensions of assurance that we need to be thinking about. NIST put out an AI risk management framework recently, last year, I believe. So has every other organization in the world, and so has every other government organization out there. There are 50+ assurance frameworks out there, 500+ reports on AI assurance. The question is, what do I need to assure? I need to make sure it's interpretable. I need to make sure it's civil. I need to make sure it is human empowered, that is, it enables me to achieve my goals. I need to make sure it's secure, private, safe, governable, accountable, has integrity, is effective. All these things we need to make sure, but we also need to figure out if it's not assured in these ways, what are the impacts? Because the ways in which we mitigate those effects are actually event or impact specific, and that may kind of vary depending upon the nature of assurance. Thank you.
Excellent. And I'm, as you mentioned, Paul, there are numerous risks, so I'm going to try and limit myself to a couple. I think the biggest risk with technology in general is technology is a tool. It's not good, it's not bad, and like any tool, it can be misused. So I think what we need to do when we're looking at this, and so one of the big risks is misusing the emerging technologies. And if they're misused, then they can end up causing harm. They can end up doing the wrong things, even though we think it's the right thing. One of the ways I think that we as a forensic science need to look at not really solving this, but at least looking at controlling this, is coming up with standards within our own discipline for when these tools should be used. How do you validate that they were used correctly? And what do you do if you realize that the output can't be trusted? So I think that, as much as we all enjoyed developing more standards, I think that is going to be necessary, simply because, like I said, it is a tool. We can't rely on the tool itself for this kind of self-monitoring. It's incumbent upon us, as the human overlords for now, to at least have some control over that. And I think the other is, a lot of these emerging technologies are being developed in an environment that really is not the same environment that we think of as forensic sciences. as scientists. The business model for the companies that are developing these emerging technologies is move fast, break things, and apologize later. That's not a good model for the forensic sciences. We want to be very careful. We want to not have to apologize later. And we don't necessarily want to move fast and give up the reliability, integrity, and trust of these systems. So I think we have to be a little bit careful that we step back from the hype, that we step back from this. Yes, on the research side, that's great. It is a bit of an arms race. You want to have things moving fast because theoretically, the impact of being wrong is theoretical. In the forensic sciences, the impact of being wrong is devastating. So I think we also have to look at, okay, there's a model out there for the development of that. That's not the same thinking that we want to bring into the forensic sciences. We need to be more cautious. If that means being slightly behind maybe that technology curve, I think that's not a bad thing.
Can I just follow up real quick? I think it's important to say when we're talking about risks is to think about the other side of the coin. Normally, we think about negative impacts on an individual, an organization, society, a community, and so on. But there's also a benefit to society as well. And of course, and many people would actually describe that as a risk. I think we should accept that this is an amazing technology that is still going through a rapid phase of development, but it can bring lots of benefits to society. But I think that can only be realized if we fully assure the system in the ways that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And I'll just, again, foot stomp this in a slightly different way in the sense that what do I think we should do as a group? And I think the way I would express it is engage. I am in a very tech-savvy group, and even in that group, folks are reluctant to engage with AI. Like, it's not going to help me, or if it does, I'm scared of it. And so to find this balance of how we can work with it, because it does do some things well and does some things terribly. So we have to engage and find where it works.
I agree. As forensic science, we have a dog in this fight. Yeah. And I think we really have to realize that and not sit back and be passive. We need to be active consumers of this technology, active advocates, and active critics when we need to be.
And active designers. I think you need a seat at the table when it's going through design and development too.
Absolutely.
Judge, maybe you can comment on, how we can prevent bias within the forensic sciences and the possibility of manipulation and ensure fair application in the pursuit of justice. How can we ensure equitable access and distribution of these technologies so as not to exacerbate inequalities in society?
Well, judges have a very simple way of eliminating the bias, and that is we just don't let it in. Or as I like to say to the lawyers, no is a complete sentence. But the bias can really come in how the algorithm is created. And it doesn't have to be a conscious bias. It can be cognitive bias, just from the approach of the creator of the algorithm. But I wanted to comment on the second part of the question, which is equitable distribution in the legal context. On the one hand, in civil cases, AI may actually help to make the process more equal. It can equalize the battle between the large law firm with 200 associates sitting in the library who represents the insurance companies, and on the other hand, the plaintiff's attorney who's in solo practice somewhere, and AI may actually put them on a more equal footing in the civil cases. But on the other hand, there's a significant concern that the use of AI and other advanced technologies can exacerbate the inequalities that already exist in our criminal system. The government has all the technology tools at its disposal. The defendant and the defense attorney usually have no such resources. We already see that in the availability of expert of expert witnesses, where the prosecution can use forensic science experts who are already paid employees of the government, or can go out and hire outside experts to testify. The defense typically has no in-house forensic science experts. The defense attorney usually has little or no expertise to even know whether or what kind of expert is needed, and even has to ask the judge for the money to find out what kind of expert they needed, or to find such an expert. The public defender office does not have a laboratory, at least none that I know, and neither the public defender nor the attorneys who are appointed defense attorneys by the judge will typically have subscriptions to the most common legal AI technology. They won't have Westlaw AI or ChatGPT or any of the other extensive and expensive AI applications. How do we provide equal justice in criminal context under those circumstances? It's a significant concern that we're going to make what is already an unequal balance in the criminal justice system even more inequitable.
As a technology guy, I've been railing on this for a while. We have now some dramatic efforts by commercial firms to push AI, but they are making advances that are extremely expensive, right? To build the next model, I need to literally build new nuclear power plants in order to power these things. And to try to realize their returns for investments, right? They'll give you maybe a free model that performs at this level, but the one that performs at this level will cost you a lot of money.
$200 a month.
Exactly. So what I think we can do for this is, and I think we're starting to see this now, from a technology perspective, we have to look at how can we build these things that are performant, that are low power, that are low cost, that are open source, so that people can develop the technologies, right? I have found a way to use this language model in a way that nobody else has thought of. I can't have just 5 labs in the world to come up with all the things that we need, right? I need to make this more open source. I need to make this cheaper. So I think from a technology perspective, that will help with this.
Right. Totally agree with Eric on that. And I really do think, though, that technology is not going to, we're never going to get rid of bias. That is unfortunately inherent in some of this. I do think, though, that we can possibly come up with better ways of detecting bias when it occurs. And then hopefully that detection will be before we're too far down the path and the barn door is closed and the horse is around the curve. The problem that I see with some of this inequity is newer technologies that are, for lack of a better term, the hybrid. So there are traditional tools and technologies that are bolting this AI-enabled technologies. When that happens, the price of these tools go up. They don't go down. And what we're seeing, and being in an area where we are so dependent upon this technology in the digital forensics area, we're seeing there is an inequity with the ability to even afford the software, the applications. So even if the defense can hire an expert witness, the private consultant for the defense doesn't have the deep pockets of the government, doesn't have the deep pockets of the prosecution. So even the access to the same tools, because in a lot of these cases there is some tool dependency on what the output might look like or how thorough that you might be able to examine that before you come up with an opinion. So one of the big concerns, as you mentioned, is this whole, are we going to increase that disparity? Or is it going to become now a more unequal playing field simply because as we add newer things to our technology, the vendors, and rightly so, the cost is going up. But when that cost goes up, the ability to use that, the access to that goes up, and the ability to have, I think, a level playing field where both experts have access to the same types of tools and the same ability to make that decision could potentially go down if we're not careful.
Maybe I can ask a question in that, because we're talking about this for the first time. maybe there could be legislation in the future. I mean, in the sense that if somebody can't afford representation, they're, appointed a public defender, because that's seen as part of the fairness in the system. So maybe if this becomes such an effective tool, there could be legislation in the future that the public defender's office or all defenders should have access to this database or something like that. That would yet to have to happen. But
Well, good luck in trying to convince state legislatures that they should appropriate more money for the defense of people they already regard as criminals. That would be a way to approach it, but I'm not holding my breath.
And then Dr. Ward?
Yeah, I think it's important when we're talking about bias to actually say what we mean. I'm a psychologist, and so when I think about bias, I'm really thinking about discrimination, right? And nobody wants discrimination against anybody for any reason from any walk of life. But when we're talking about bias in AI, we're often conflating discrimination for statistical bias or algorithmic bias or even cognitive bias. And there is a growing number of individuals who would suggest that the reason why machine learning or AI models are biased is because the humans programming them have cognitive biases, and somehow those leak over into the system. I want to push back a little bit and say that bias is not necessarily a bad thing. We live by good bias heuristics. Look before you leap. I bet you've all used that one. I bet you can all think of 20 others that you live by. Yeah, don't judge a book by its cover. Biases are not necessarily bad, they're functional. They just don't work in every situation. So it's knowing when to apply them and when they're going to basically give you a very bad answer. That's the art of using those biases. And the other thing to think about is that biases are not necessarily what it says on the tin. That's a British euphemism, I'm sorry. What that means is, to be a bias, something should be persistent, systematic, and difficult to change. Most cognitive biases, or so-called cognitive biases, go away under certain circumstances. That is, they're not persistent, they're not difficult to change, and they are, they're not necessarily systematic. So I think we need to open up the conversation about bias in this field and say, what are we actually talking about? Do we want to produce a model that is biased, that does or does not result in discrimination? And this brings us back to kind of the narrow versus general AI approach. And you could think of, to some extent, a narrow AI approach as being a set of biased models, or slightly biased models, if you like, because a little bit of bias is necessary in most systems to work effectively to do the computation. And that set of biased models would essentially be very specific to very specific situations where they would work well in that situation, but not work very well elsewhere. So again, use the model in the appropriate way at the appropriate time and you'll do well. When you're in a different situation, use one of your other models. That's how we as humans work. We have multiple mental models that describe our world that we live in. We don't simply have one. Right. But general AI may be thinking about it in more broader terms. Can we develop a foundation model that covers all situations from which then we can build other models? And so I think it's, therefore you might say, well, actually having bias in that general model might be really, really more problematic. Because if it's biased now it starts to have a much broader effect across all situations. So I think it's very important for us to say what is it we're talking about when we talk about bias and define it appropriately so that we can reduce the thing that we know we don't want, and we all agree we don't want discrimination, but we can actually put in the things that we need that make these models functional.
I got a quick add. When I was in grad school, oh, so long ago, it was okay to talk about bias. We could talk about Occam's razor, right? I can generate explanations for the data that you gave me, and I'm going to purposely bias it toward the simpler ones. Yeah. So many years ago, bias was a good word.
Yeah.
And Yeah, at the risk of being too philosophical along those lines, I had people ask me when I was a judge, aren't you supposed to be unbiased and have no prejudice? And I said, no, you misunderstand the system. I am prejudiced. I am prejudiced against people who commit crimes. I'm prejudiced against people who injure others, who defraud others. The system is meant to have that bias. The issue is not having prejudice in deciding who comes into that category, deciding who committed the crime, deciding who defrauded someone else. That's the issue. This used to come up when we were doing voir dire of jurors. And you have a case where there was a child sexual assault, and the juror would say, I can't fairly decide this case because I think people who commit child sexual assaults are the worst form of human beings. And then I would try to explain to the juror that, yes, we all have that bias. That's why it's a crime. That's why we call it a crime. But what you're being asked to decide here is whether this person falls into that category or not, whether this person is a child sexual abuser beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the difference between good bias and bad bias, if you want to put it that way.
Excellent.
Next question for Dr. Rogers. How important is the development of explainable AI as it pertains to the forensic sciences? And first, can you please explain what explainable AI is?
All right. It's extremely important. I'll start off with that. Explainable AI, or XAI, is an area within AI research that looks at how do we understand what's in that black box. And this comes from basically the fact that there's an inverse relationship between the accuracy and increasing the accuracy of our models and understanding how they got to that decision. And this is actually something that, obviously, if you're looking at the sole goal of the technology is to make precise predictions and to be accurate, then that's okay. The forensic sciences, on the other hand, we need to know what are the steps, how did it get there? So while the term explainable AI, I want to think of this as more as trustworthy AI. How do we know it came up with answer X? How do we know that the steps that were taken, or how do we go back now and understand that so it can be reproducible? How does somebody else that's going to look at this say, oh yes, I understand how it got there? That also goes to the reliability, the validity of that. If we don't understand that, then it's going to be very difficult going into and before the judge, and the judge saying, great, how did it come to that decision? And we go, well, we put it in here, it popped out here, and we don't know what happened in the middle. That's not a very good explanation to go into that with. And there are, like I said, there are ways that we can actually kind of tune these models so there still is this explainability, yet we still are getting a reasonable precision. And maybe it might slow it down a little bit when we're doing this, but to me that is a fair trade-off when we're looking at the potential impact that some of these decisions have. So like I said, the explainable is nice, but I think we're looking, especially from the forensic sciences perspective, trustworthy AI. How do we get there? That's a whole different panel discussion, but I think that's something we have to not ignore. It's not just, wow, we can make predictions about the weather or predictions about what you're going to want to buy on Amazon next. We also have to look at, great, how do I explain that? How do I go back and audit how it got there? And in some cases say, you know what, maybe it didn't do this quite correctly. A lot of what we're seeing right now when we see some of the ones that claim to be the explainable AI, it's really just a post hoc analysis after the black box effect. Input, we look at the output, and then we try to infer, well, we think this happened in the middle, but we don't really know. And in some cases, it's not going to be as simple as saying, well, we'll just bring the company in who developed the model to go to court, and they're going to sit there, and they're going to explain it. They don't even know. They don't understand. They've lost control of explaining depending upon the model, but in most cases. So it's not like, oh, well, that's okay. Or if this is kind of more for the courts, if the vendors or the companies go to court and claim that they're not trying to protect necessarily intellectual property, they may legitimately not know how it got from A to Z. So I think that is, like I said, so I think the trustworthy or explainable AI is kind of that Goldilocks zone within AI that I think really fits the forensic sciences.
I think there's some hope. Years ago, when XAI sort of first came out, there were tools that would let you know if I'm making a prediction, where in the neural network, which layer and which node lit up. And you're like, that doesn't help me. Unless I am a deep machine learning expert, it does not, care. That's like looking into somebody's head and going, well, that's where these, neurons fired. Unless you have deep expertise and go, this is this part of the brain and so forth. What recent development is interesting in along this is all these reasoning models, right? So O1 and others that are now not just say, let's take these technologies and get some prompt in and then generate some output, but you can ask it, you can prompt it, you can encourage it to give you step-by-step reasons, which I think starts to get closer to this trustworthy. It's not telling you the mechanics of how it got to an answer, but it's giving you some steps that it claims that it followed, but again, now you've got more things to check. And so there's active engagement with what you asked it, what it claimed to have done, and then check the work, right? One, I think MIT professor said, treat these things like a good intern, right? Ask them questions, but then verify.
Right. And it's interesting because I can see us getting into a situation where we ask the technology, well, how did you get to this? It tells us how to get to this, and then we ask it, well, how did you know how you got to that? So we end up getting into this whole tautology where it's just, we end up in the dog eating its tail, and we never really understand. And I don't think the courts are going to be comfortable with, well, how do you know it did it that way? Because the technology told me it did it that way.
There are really two prongs to the Daubert Federal Rule 702 rules for admitting expert evidence. The first we've talked about, which is the science reliable? Is this AI app reliable? The second is, has it been reliably applied to the circumstances of this case? That's the second prong, and that's where explainability is so important, and where I think many times it's going to fall short.
Yep.
Just a couple of comments. So the issue of explainability comes up in these deep learning models or very complex high parameter models, that is lots and lots of different variables in the mix that are being used to produce an outcome. And one example of that was Google Flu. You may remember that model. It started to predict flu outbreaks and kind of with frequency and location and so on. And then it started to work well up until the point when it didn't. And then they figured, well, we need to revise the model. And so to deal with the problem of solving a complex problem, they took a increased complexity approach. That is, let's throw in more parameters. So now we have a 100 plus parameter model that's been upgraded to maybe 150, 200 plus parameter model that becomes very difficult to understand what's actually happening. And again, this model starts to do well up until the point when it doesn't, and then they start to revise the model again. And so the pattern continues until COVID came and said, okay, Google dropped it. Here's the interesting question. Can we do better by rethinking how we solve complexity? There's an answer, and that is yes, when we're dealing with uncertainty. And some of you may have read Nassim Taleb's book and be familiar with the turkey illusion. If not, come and find me afterwards and I'll tell you the story. If not, read the book, very, very good. The point being that when you're in conditions of uncertainty and you don't know possibly for absolute certainty what the likelihood of an event might be or what the actual events might be, and there may be events you haven't even considered, so there's lots of different levels and layers of uncertainty. In those situations, simpler models work better. A 2-parameter model, a simple regression model with a slope and intercept, outperformed the Google flu model. And you can look this up by Gerd Gigerenzer from Max Planck and Konstantinos Katsikopoulos. They've got a wonderful book out as well that I highly recommend. I can't remember the title though. But here's the issue. That model was fully explainable. You could understand what data it was using and how it was making the prediction. And it was based upon some very simple heuristics. And the heuristic that it uses is something called recency heuristic. Use the most recent data point that worked. And then the next step, time point, use the most recent data point that worked last time. And basically you're modeling based upon recency. And that approach outperforms Google's 200 plus parameter model that's got millions and millions of data points. So sometimes throwing AI at a problem or throwing more complexity and more data at a problem isn't the right solution when you're dealing with uncertainty. But in more stable worlds and less uncertain environments, it's very likely that AI is going to dominate and provide very, very useful tools for us to support our industry and our domain.
I think another component of the explainability is understanding the data that it was trained on, looking at that data. Kind of a more recent example of how the wrong data can end up having the wrong output is the Super Bowl commercial, where one of the companies that we won't mention actually found out that it was creating this website, and it was creating, this guy was doing this for cheese, and it said that before they caught it, that the certain type of cheese was the most popular cheese in the world. It wasn't. It actually, when they went back and looked at it, the information was coming from a few websites who that information was wrong or was out of context. And that got built into it, and they came up and they realized, luckily beforehand, that whoops, that is a mistake. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a mistake. And they had to basically kind of figure out a way of okay, cut and paste, put something else in there, and it really came up with that even though it didn't. So understanding the data, understanding how it was trained is extremely important. And that also goes to understanding the bias that can go into the model. And I think when we're looking at this, again, from the forensic sciences perspective, we have possibly some very unique types of data. So some of these models that we have out there that are being trained simply on everything on the internet, I'm not so confident that it's got completely accurate information directly from scraping the internet. So we have to look at more closed data sets. They have to be large enough that we can do the training, but we also want to look at data sets that we can trust as being accurate. And I think some of these models do that. So the models where you take your information that you've gathered, it's your information, it's your data, it's stuff that you could, the input can be trusted. You feed that into the model, then I'm a little bit more comfortable, kind of trusting some of the because I can then go back and determine, did it get that right? So I think part of that explainability is understanding what was used to train it, to teach it, as much as we can.
I think some of the bias can especially come out when the person who's putting it in is result-oriented. That's what we find in the legal briefs I was talking about. So they start with the proposition that I want the answer to be yes. I want the answer to be yes. How do I get there? And that's when AI grabs bad websites or makes up cases or whatever. And the bias really comes in predetermining the result.
And the way we think about this stuff is it's not all automated. There are still humans in the loop basically making decisions as for the data that's going into these models. There's entire companies in certain parts of the world who have people, and their job is to look at these things and classify them, or make it correct, or tweak the models. So if those humans have bias, and they do, good or bad, okay, and in some cases it might be, depending upon where they are in the world, it might be a cultural bias, it might be, so we got a biased thing, a biased organism that's making decisions, and then saying this is X, this is Y, or you're not right, and then that goes into the training model. So contrary to popular belief, it's not this completely automated process with no humans in the mix from the very beginning. And that has to be taken into account. And that's also why we're seeing some of these bias. Again, results oriented. You have to, if this is kind of like your sweatshop, and it really is, how many pictures can you classify or how many things can you correct in a day? And that's how much you're going to get paid. How careful are you going to be in actually making sure that you got it right versus if I don't hit my quota for today, I'm not going to have a job tomorrow. So that's kind of a dirty secret of the AI models we have now, but it's very relevant for us being able to trust what's coming out the other end of those models.
We want to be, maybe I can do it from here. We want to be able to take some questions from the audience in the time that we have left. And so if people would be kind enough to come up to the podium, and we'll have the panelists address your questions.
I have a question. It seems to me that you might be dancing around one topic, or maybe I'm missing something. I work as a researcher, an academician, and also an editor of a couple of forensic science journals. And the problem is, as an academician, I have to deal with the problem now that I can't really give homework questions because they're all going to get answered by AI. And in my opinion, that's obviously plagiarism. It's also the student representing themselves as an expert when they clearly are not. And I would think it would be very hard to determine in a legal brief whether someone is expressing their opinion or expressing their opinion that they obtained from AI because they were too lazy to look it up themselves. In the case of the journals, we've had several situations where a paper was clearly written by AI, but we have the problem of accusing the author that this is AI, and they would just be completely offended that we would even suggest that. And in my situation as an editor, all I have to do is go read the article and realize that it's full of errors, and the errors that are made make zero sense in terms of the context of the argument. And so I don't have to accuse this person of AI, because the AI is so bad that obviously it's a fake and false article. But I really would like you to address this idea that you can't tell unless you have very sophisticated software, and even then, there's no guarantee that this particular opinion that you're using to create or to make some kind of judgment is actually created by AI and not by the individual who purports to be the expert. Thank you.
Thank you. Would somebody like to comment?
Can I respond to the academician part? One of the things Michael Rogers was talking about was looking for odd phrases or odd work. I assigned an essay, and the student was quoting a Supreme Court case, and his essay said, in that case, the lordships held. And even I, as dumb as I am, said, bling, bling, bling.
Yeah, no, it's a great question about what do we do in the sort of academic world, right? One big topic that we don't have time for is deep fakes, right?
Yes.
The ability of these models to synthetically generate images, videos, combining those things. A movie of me saying things I never said is going to be quite realistic. And there's an ongoing battle between these things to be able to identify these artificially generated. That's an ongoing thing from a technology perspective. I'm not sure where it's going to go yet. I don't have good answers. That's a great question.
As a fellow academic, yeah, that's a huge problem. It is pretty obvious, though, when they actually leave the prompts in the actual paper where it says, that's a good question. Here is the response. That's usually an indication that it might have been AI.
But,
We're gonna move on.
as an academic, we're training people to be responsible. And what I'm worried about is how do you deal within a judicial system when the same thing occurs? And someone has clearly not written the opinion that they actually are purporting to make.
By the way, obviously we have a number of people with questions and fairly limited time, so people could abbreviate their questions as best as possible.
Great topic. What do you think about the black box effect that exists currently within our own practices? And that, historically, I've been practicing 35 years, forensic pathology. I always tell our fellows, look, if you can document as much so that if you were to get hit by a car as you leave this office, anyone else can look at that data and come up with an opinion. I'm curious what you all think about our current black box that exists in many of our disciplines.
So I'm not sure I'm entirely familiar with how black box manifests itself in your discipline, but from my perspective, and actually I heard this just this week when asking about AI assurance in nuclear planning. And basically the comment from some of the stakeholders was that we already have our own black boxes and they're called experts. Yes. And so this is a knowledge elicitation problem. And I've written extensively on the field of expertise, and I can share resources with you about how we go about eliciting that knowledge from experts. There are some very, very good tools out there. But I think when you compare those tools against what you can do with AI, you get different things out of them. And the things that work for experts don't work for novices, because novices are really good at giving you causal theories that just are not correct, right? They make sense. They could have been the way that they did things, but they weren't. Where novices have experts have a bit better memory for those things. How you use those tools in an AI context to understand, to unpack that black box, that's a career in itself, I think.
Right. And you know, I'm not familiar with how the black box works in your field, but in the digital forensics, we have been dealing with this black box effect simply, since this technology has come out. We've lost the ability to understand. Now, what we can do is infer post hoc. We know theoretically how it should work. We understand, the computer science components of it. And, assuming that this works, then we think that it probably did it well. But that's not a very comfortable position to be in, because it's not the tool standing there before the judge saying, in my opinion, it did this. So if it's wrong, I'm gonna be the one that is now, has made the mistake, that is going to lose that credibility. But this is not something that's new. It's not something that's good, but it's something that could be exacerbated by AI if we don't look at that and we don't address that right now. Because, like I said, we already have that problem, and it's not a good problem. And to be quite honest, I wish the courts would push back on that more. You have to tell us what's going on, or at least have that trust that it's not, that what you're seeing it makes sense. That's the other thing. Does it make sense? Don't blindly believe what's popping out. I would like it to see more maybe of a grayish box, maybe not a complete black box, but I don't, if we get to a gray box, I'd be happy.
Just to clarify, what I mean by black box is everything from the direct observation to a written report.
Yep.
Is the black box.
Yep.
Thank you.
Dr. Thompson, but before we go on, I'm a forensic psychiatrist, and we testify all the time on risk and culpability, and the greatest black box is the expert. But the whole gig in writing the report and testifying is explaining how you came to that conclusion, and so that's what the difference is. If you can't, then your credibility is less than ideal. Dr. Thompson? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Hi, Sarah Chu, Perlmutter Center for Legal Justice at Cardozo Law School. I was recently part of an organizing committee, this echo, for a National Academy of Sciences workshop on emerging technologies in genomics. And in short, an Intercept article describes how a private company asked for the NAS to pull down all of the videos from that workshop because there was a panel that was criticizing that company's technology. So this panel has been amazing in describing what users and developers should be doing to mitigate potential risks of tyranny from AI technologies, but how do we mitigate potential risks from private industry when life and liberty are at stake?
That is a $6 million question. And I think a lot of it's going to have to be by kind of, I hate saying this, is a little bit by the marketplace. So actually picking those tools and technologies that the companies are willing to share what's in that black box. So trusting that. So as we are deciding what becomes the standard that's to be used, or the courts are looking at what they're going to be comfortable with. So I think there is some consumer pressure that we can put on, and we as the consumers, because we are the consumers, and we're this, and we're the stakeholders. So some stakeholder and consumer pressure on these private companies that, you know what, if you're going to be predatory, if you're not willing to help us trust what that technology is, we're not going to use your product. We are not going to, we're not going to have it as the standard we're going to use, and we're not going to be using it in court. I know that's a very weak way of doing it, but absent any government regulations, which I do not see coming anytime soon, I don't know of another way of putting that pressure on them.
As a technology guy, I'll say I'm going to hit the point I hit earlier, which is engage with this technology, encourage the use of open source. There are models, there are tools that are outside there and are available. We need to democratize access to these things as much as possible, and then you will help alleviate that challenge.
Somewhat. Yep.
Somewhat.
Dr. Thompson.
Oh, yeah, that kind of, at the very end of one of your responses kind of raised another question for me. I don't know if any of you work with state legislatures, state legislative offices, Congress, but I was curious how sophisticated in general they seemed about these technologies and whether there was any appetite to, I see Mark shaking his head, whether there were any appetite to regulate or modulate, or if we're just always going to be running behind on this and playing catch up.
I'm going to jump in here simply because I had a student who was doing a Doctor of Technology, and her dissertation was trying to develop curriculum for lawmakers who are actually passing or were supposed to be passing legislation and laws related to AI. And what she wanted to do is, first of all, before she could understand what kind of training they needed so they could make, here's the quote, informed decisions, is what was their current knowledge? What did they currently know about it? So I thought, oh, this is pretty utopian, but I'll let her run with this to see how this goes. We had a plan B because we knew that wasn't going to go. I didn't want to, she's super excited and the enthusiasm of youth on this. And so she crafted a really, really good survey. It was all IRB approval, looking at kind of a prior knowledge and kind of benchmarking where these individuals were. She started off, she wanted to do it federally. I said, let's start a little smaller. Let's start in our state, and that being Indiana. So she sent this to, she got the addresses for all the representatives. She sent this to all of them and to their aides. 2 weeks go by, not one response. Okay, 3 weeks go by, not one response. Sends it out again. No, we ended up getting 0 responses after 4 months. Nobody wanted to answer it. Nobody, and we knew that it got to them. Nobody even wanted to, I'm not going there. I don't want anybody to know that I don't know or even be able to gauge this. So obviously we went with a plan B on this. But that's just an example of, I think there is, bury the head in the sand. I don't know what it is. And you know what? I don't want to even take the opportunity. We weren't going to release the results of that as a criticism. We were going to look at how do we then help them become more informed so they can make decisions that we're going to have to live with. And there wasn't even an appetite to do that.
I wrote a book, the subtitle of which was, Can the Law Keep Up with Science? And I was talking to the dean of the law school, and he said, I saw your book, Can the Law Keep Up with Science? The answer is no. What are the other 250 pages about? And I had an example of that. I was appointed by the Michigan governor to serve on a comprehensive task force on improving forensic science in the state of Michigan. And we spent 2 years doing that and produced a lengthy series of recommendations about how the legislature and how the law could take steps to improve the application of forensic science. And we finished that, and it's sitting on a shelf somewhere because I hate to tell you this, but your occupation isn't very sexy. There are many legislators who want to go back and tell their constituents, and I proposed a bill that would change the way we treat forensic science in criminal cases. Yawn. I don't see much hope for that, Doctor. I wish I felt better about it, but my experience is not good in terms of getting the law to even address, much less compensate for our problems.
We're going to go to the next question because we are running short on time. So please go ahead. Thank you.
So my question is, there's been some talk today about how AI is this human-fed model. And so in this field, we rely on a lot of scientific journals for whatever this human-fed model would look like. With the current government censorship, how do you see, if any, some of the negative impacts that would have in this field?
As a computer science guy, I will just say we've known for a while, garbage in, garbage out. Right, you've got even in the early days before you had these generative AI models, the challenge was, how do I get a data set that is representative of all the situations that I need to be able to account for, in my testing? And if you don't have that, it's not going to perform effectively. So. Do we recognize this is a problem? Absolutely. As a technology guy, do I have a good answer for how we do this as a community? Other than my mantra here of engage and use these tools and do things like BBC just did this article about using these models to summarize their own BBC News stories. And it turns out it was terrible. Right? It just made stuff up. So engage, demonstrate where these things work so we don't all just sort of get overwhelmed by this and go, well, I guess I'm just going to have to accept this. Engage, talk, communicate. It's my best answer.
And there's actually kind of it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because one of the solutions would be to not just go with it has been published. Because there are some biases, and that's a whole other discussion, on what actually gets published. Not all the work that is good gets published. There's biases by the journal, by the editorial board as to things that had no results or that had the results tend not to get published in a lot of these scientific journals. So there's already some bias in that already. Good thing or bad thing? In this case, maybe bad thing. But the easy solution was, well, then don't just go with what's been published. But then that opens up the whole risk of, then we go to, Forensics is Us website, and we're pulling, articles that have not been peer reviewed out of those. So there has to be some type of a balancing between not just what gets published in these journals, but what are some of the other sources that we can legitimately trust as there was some type of a review, and look at putting those into those data sets. But how we do that, that's a very hard question.
We're going to have to.
We want to thank everybody so much for coming today. We're so sorry that we're not getting to all these questions. It's wonderful that there's so much interest in this. And we want to thank all the panelists for coming and taking up their time to talk to us about this. We understand that this is, an ongoing discussion that's not going to end. So if you could please all join me in thanking the panelists. And before we end, I'd like to invite